Thank you so much, Mr. Belk, for your comments. Mr. Belk is right. Insider Threat Awareness Month really is about getting that message out there, not only the risk to our personnel, to our organizations in both the public and the private sector, but also getting the information about the role of all of you and all of you out there listening in identifying and reporting indicators. It's not just a role we have, it's a responsibility that we undertake. And I think we know this inherently. Every single one of us knows that we should be reporting information. We take the annual training. We pass posters in the hallway. See something, say something is probably the most ubiquitous phrase to anybody in this community. And yet we don't do it. What is it that holds us back from making that call, from sending that email, from walking down the hall? Some of it may be as simple as what we're taught as kids, right? You don't want to be a snitch, you don't want to be a tattletale, and that's ingrained a little bit. I get that. Some of us also may think, you know what, I see it in the newspaper, but that would never happen here, would never happen at my organization. Unfortunately, it does, right? So this month, we're also commemorating the tragedy of the Navy Yard shooting. We also remember the tragedy of Fort Hood and many, many other events that have occurred at both public and private organizations throughout the country. You also, as Wayne said, cannot open the paper without seeing another case. Harold Martin was just sentenced. Reality winner, Kevin Patrick Mallory, these names resonate. And when that insider threat occurs, however it manifests, whether it as espionage or another national security crime, theft, fraud, sabotage, workplace violence, harm to self or others, what we find is it's often in the very early phases those same indicators. So no matter how that insider threat turns out, very early on, those same behaviors and activities of concern are what we can notice, observe, and report in order to make a difference. I think one of the other things that prevents people maybe from making those reports is a misunderstanding of insider threat programs in general. What if I'm wrong? What if I report my coworker or my friend and they get in trouble for no reason? Insider threat programs are not designed to get anybody in trouble. If you're familiar with insider threat programs, as I know many of our audience here are, and probably many of you online, these are multidisciplinary teams that are designed to deter, detect, and mitigate risk. And as Mr. Belk discussed, that deterrence factor and that mitigation factor often come by developing positive outcomes for individuals. So the program really wants to get left of boom, or as Wayne said, get ahead of the problem. Our idea is to identify folks who might need a little help at one time or another and push them through so that they can remain in access, remain productive, have positive outcomes for both the individuals and for your organization. So how do we figure out what those indicators are that we need to report? I think we should start with the basics. So if you're in this room, look to your left, look to your right. If you're tuning in online, look in the mirror. That's an insider, right? Somebody who has authorized access. We're all insiders. What makes an insider threat is when that individual with authorized access uses it to either wittingly or unwittingly cause harm to an organization and its resources, which can include information, classified or otherwise, which can include facilities, which can include personnel. Now, when I'm describing the insider threat, I really find it's helpful to reference the movie Office Space. Have you guys seen this movie, Office Space? I'm seeing a lot of head nods. Probably a lot of you out there online as well. If you haven't seen it, look it up afterwards. It's a good movie. This movie has a character named Milton. And Milton is just one of those guys. super awkward, doesn't have a lot of really positive social interactions with his coworkers. He has a very unnatural attachment to his red swingline stapler. Throughout the movie, Milton also gives off a lot of indicators. He is disgruntled with his job, and he in fact expresses it to many of his coworkers. He's disgruntled because everybody gets birthday cake at the office party except for Milton. He's disgruntled and in fact experiencing some financial difficulties, which is another indicator because payroll keeps forgetting to issue his paycheck. Throughout the movie, people are very aware, but they don't report it and they don't address it. In fact, what they do with Milton is they continue to move him farther and farther away from all of his coworkers to where the end of the movie he is sitting in the basement at his desk next to the furnace. What happens at the end of the movie? What does Milton do? He burns the building down. Is that an insider threat? Yes. Is this the kind of guy that after he burnt the building down, every single person said, I always knew there was something about that guy? Yes. The reality is in most insider threat cases, and I get it that hindsight is 20/20, but in most insider threat cases, those concerning behaviors were evident prior to the negative event. Everybody saw it coming. Nobody said anything. Now, I don't want to just pick on poor Milton. I don't know if you guys remember, but there's another insider threat in this movie. This insider threat is named Peter. He's the guy holding the baseball bat. And Peter is the anti-Milton. Peter is cool. Peter has lots of positive social interactions. But Peter also gives off indicators throughout the movie. He is aloof. He is disgruntled with his job. He gets to the point where he shows up to work, but he doesn't do any work. His coworkers are aware of this. He talks about it all the time. He also exhibits maybe some violent behavior. I don't know if you can see this slide very well, but they have taken a photocopier from the office out to a field, and he and two coworkers are beating it with a baseball bat. Now, I have spent 20 years working for the federal government. There has been a photocopier or two in my time that I have had strong words with. But this kind of behavior is pretty extreme and pretty violent. Nobody reports Peter. And in fact, Peter is often rewarded throughout the movie for his behavior. What does Peter do at the end of the movie? He sets up an algorithm, yes, where he steals about $1 million from this company. Is this an insider threat? Yes, it's an insider threat. Doesn't look the same. Very different looking, very different type of person. We don't profile in insider threat programs. We don't go after a certain demographic, a certain look, a certain background. What we're looking for with an insider threat indicator are behaviors and activities of concern, anomalous behavior. So we're not just picking on the Miltons of the world or any other class. What we're trying to pay attention to is those cries for help and distress or indicators that somebody is going to engage in negative activity or is at risk to do so. And we'll talk about some of those indicators, but there actually is one more insider threat in this movie that I forgot to tell you about. One more. You guys remember this guy? Yes, right? Worst boss in the history of the world. He is clueless. He treats his employees poorly. There is no level of organizational trust within this organization. He's not transparent. He's not fair. Would you say, those of you who have seen it, that he facilitated those insider threats? There's a lot of head nods here, those of you that can't see it. Yes, because he failed to address the issues. This kind of poor leadership is also a risk for insider threat. And this kind of thing is something that can also be reported to an insider threat program. And often mitigation response, I'm not saying the boss is going to get fired. That's probably not going to happen. But there are ways that we can bring others outside of the insider threat program into that intervention process. Teach people how to appropriately respond to threats and risks in the environment so that we don't exacerbate them. This is one example of that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what other factors contribute to insider threat or contribute to vulnerability. There's something called the critical pathway. It was devised by Dr. Eric Shaw and his cohorts. And in this model, it talks about how individuals reach certain decision points as they go along. And individuals who maybe have a certain predisposition and then experience stressors in their life might reach these thresholds and move either down a critical pathway towards a negative event, or we might identify some periods of time where they can be diverted off and interventions can successfully bring positive outcomes for them. What kind of indicators would come up, or what kind of events would trigger somebody to move down that critical pathway? Well, life crises, whether real or perceived, are things that occur in everybody's life. And some people may use those to travel down the critical pathway. What's a life crisis? Well, they can be in your personal life. We can be talking about divorce. We can be talking about death of a loved one. We can be talking about dealing with an annoying teenager who's just starting to drive. We can be talking about financial problems. We can be talking about stress caused by alcohol or drug abuse. We can be talking about undiagnosed or untreated medical conditions, including mental health conditions. And I see your faces. You're right. Those are not necessarily life crises. That's just life, right? Those are things that all of us deal with at one point or another. And there are a lot of young people in this audience, I'm warning you, those are happening to you too, eventually. That's life. Everybody goes through these various seminal events, and they're stressful, and they're difficult, and they're a time when we're at a greater vulnerability to pose an insider threat or to move down that critical pathway. What an insider threat program does is reach out to those individuals, or hopefully they'll learn that they can reach out to the insider threat program and find ways to mitigate those life events. So an insider threat program is a multidisciplinary team. It's made up of CI, security, all the security disciplines can participate, information security, personnel security, cybersecurity is a big one, guidance from law enforcement, human resources, I know I'm forgetting somebody, mental health and behavioral science professionals. This group works together to help come up with resources and mitigation strategies that can divert somebody off of that critical pathway and get them back into a productive environment, foster a positive outcome, not only for them, but for their organization. The other thing when you hear me describe those life crises, and I talked about things like personal problems, drug or alcohol abuse, medical issues, etc., those sound a lot like the adjudicative guidelines. And if any of you, I guess all of you in this building, hold a security clearance, you know that these are the factors that are used to determine eligibility for access for a security or suitability clearance. You know, when personnel security looks at individuals, they take these into consideration, but they use what's called the whole person concept. So the idea being that a person is not defined by this one event that might have occurred, and a very human event that many of us go through. But the whole person is taken into account, as well as mitigating factors that might still make somebody eligible for a clearance, despite the fact that they've had this vulnerability. It's very rare that something will reach the level of a disqualifying factor that would prevent or remove access or eligibility for access. Insider threat programs work hand in hand to ensure that trusted workforce with a personnel security program. We help with those mitigating factors. The role of the insider threat program is to mitigate risk, and we do so by recognizing when somebody is struggling and doing everything we can, bringing those multidisciplinary forces to bear to get them back on the right track. So how do you know if a coworker, a friend, somebody in your area of responsibility or that you're aware of is going through one of these events or something is happening. There are a lot of different indications, and there's probably too many to list. We call them potential risk indicators. These are those observable and reportable behaviors of concern, and they're different for everybody. What you're often looking for is those that are behaving outside of the norm for themselves. And I don't say abnormal because what's normal behavior, right? But different for them, abnormal. You all spend so many hours a week with your coworkers, probably more time with them than you do with your families. You can tell when somebody's off, when somebody's tired, when somebody's having a bad day, when somebody's having a great day. When you notice behaviors of concern and fail to report them, you're missing an opportunity. You're missing an opportunity to intervene when somebody might need it most, or if all they need is a pat on the back and a good to go, that's all they're going to get as well. But you're missing that opportunity to provide assistance to someone you know. Let's talk a little bit about some of these indicators. And again, there are a lot of them. I won't go through all of them, and they're going to be different for others. But we can cluster some in categories, potential risk indicators. So patterns of security violations for sure. Somebody who seeks to expand access, asking for information outside their need to know. Somebody who is reluctant to submit to a polygraph or other kind of security protocols, refusing to do so. Responsible for unaccounted for classified materials, trying to fish around and find stuff. Those would be indicators worth reporting. Again, this list is not all-inclusive, and you can find more detailed information on our website, cdse.edu. Also, suspicious behaviors. So things like working hours inconsistent with the job assignment, trying to be in the office when nobody else is there, coming early, leaving late, insisting on working in private without a valid reason, demonstrating exploitable behavior traits, and we talked about how some of those might contribute to that life crisis trigger. But there's very many behaviors and activities that could be exploited or make somebody vulnerable to recruitment or elicitation. Revealing unexplained affluence, so somebody who's flashing a lot of cash and didn't win the Mega Millions, that might be suspicious. You might have somebody who's experiencing the opposite, maybe extreme debt, extreme financial hardship. And again, that's something that people will go through at various times of life. But how are they coping with that? What's the stress from that? And what does that indicate as far as a vulnerability? Unexplained foreign travel or unreported foreign travel or foreign contacts, we all have that obligation to report that. You might also want to look at suspicious behaviors surrounding legitimate and official travel and reported travel. Is it frequent? Is it unexplained? The destinations don't actually have to be foreign. If somebody is shuffling off to Buffalo every third weekend and they don't have Bill Seasons tickets and their grandma doesn't live there, why are they going? Now, does that mean that that person's an insider threat? No. If somebody's going through a life crisis, does it mean that they're an insider threat? No, not necessarily. But the risk is there. Our role is to mitigate risk. We can only do it if we know. Connection to foreign anomalies. So if somebody is associated with material that ends up, classified material that ends up in the media, or that would seem to give an adversary forewarning or foreknowledge of our activities, our information, our movements, that would be an indicator as well. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this case. So Petty Officer Second Class Brian Martin was arrested in December 2010 for attempting to pass classified material to an undercover agent posing as a Chinese spy. He pled guilty to 4 counts of attempted espionage and a host of other related crimes. in 2011, at which time he was sentenced to 48 years in prison. Martin was 22 years old, sentenced to 48 years in prison. The indicators were there. Martin was accessing information outside the need to know. He was constantly asking coworkers to access information for him, to give him access, to provide passwords. Martin was continually borrowing money from coworkers. He also evinced some lifestyle choices in addition to his massive gambling debt, which was just one part of his life crisis that he was experiencing. He was engaged to be married, wanted to impress the father-in-law, was broke from gambling. He was looking for an infusion of cash. He mishandled classified information in the office. All the indicators were there. All of his coworkers were aware of his struggles. After his sentencing, Martin conducted an interview, and it's a pretty sad interview. He talks about just the devastation to his parents when this happened. One of the things he also says is, everybody knew I was struggling. Why didn't anybody say something? Why didn't anybody say something? Why don't we say something? We see something all the time. Part of it's maybe a fear, right? I don't want my friend to be mad at me. What if I'm wrong? What if they get in trouble? Would he have been mad that you reported him to the insider threat program or security or your supervisor? Probably. Would he be serving 48 years in prison as a 22-year-old young man? Maybe not. This is the kind of thing that is happening in all of our organizations, both public and private. This was classified information. We suffer a devastating loss of proprietary and trade secret information in this country. We're experiencing economic espionage at unprecedented rates. We're experiencing those who would commit acts of violence at unprecedented rates. It's happening everywhere. In this case, we were very lucky. So it was an undercover agent. He actually didn't successfully transmit classified overseas. But imagine if he had, right? Programs that you work on, programs that you've dedicated your lives to, taxpayer dollars have been funding, programs that could endanger the warfighter if they're revealed, programs that could endanger the homeland if they're revealed. That's what's at risk here. And I know I see you out there thinking, and you're thinking, okay, Rebecca, you're right. I should report that stuff. But I'll tell you what, life crisis or not, I know myself, I know my coworkers, we're stoic, we've got broad shoulders. You know, we can handle this ourselves. We don't need the insider threat program coming along to pat us on the back and tell us we can make it through. We can make it through. Maybe you can, but the adversary is watching. The adversary is out there. The adversary is incredibly skilled at manipulation. The adversary is very capable of twisting your motivations, twisting your loyalty, and even when they cannot, the adversary is incredibly skilled at eliciting information from those who are unwilling to betray. And they're paying attention. They see these cases go down every day, and they know just where to target you. Every one of you is a target. Every one of us is a target. How do they know about it? You know, we all have such big digital footprints. How many people out here have a social media account of one form or another? LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. There's nothing wrong with that. We have them. It's a way of doing life anymore. Kind of have to have it to do business. And so long as you're practicing good cybersecurity, you have your privacy settings set, and you're aware of the signs that you may be being targeted or elicited, okay. Now, I don't have Facebook. I just never got into it. But I'll tell you who does have Facebook, and that's my mother. My mother is awesome. If you ever see this recording, Ma, you are the best. But even she would admit that she has a really, really big mouth. My mom once had an article placed in our local hometown newspaper that described my title, Special Agent Rebecca Morgan, who works at the Pentagon. She had my security clearance level in there, at least to the degree that she understood it. She named the town that I was living in at the time. Awesome lady. OPSEC is not my mom's forte. The other interesting thing about my mom, though, is that she is listed on my SF-86. That's the same SF-86 that was compromised in the OPM data breach. If you think you're good online, you're stoic, you can handle stuff, you all might not have my mom, but I guarantee every one of you and every one of your coworkers has some old auntie or some weird cousin Eddie or somebody out there in social media that is sharing your stuff. Whether that's your level of security clearance and where you're deployed to, or the life crisis that you're currently going through. That information is accessible. You are absolutely a target. You know what an insider threat program does? It helps you harden that target. So if you're being approached, elicited, recruited, we have a multidisciplinary team that can help you develop countermeasures to prevent that action, that can get you to the right folks to ensure that you're not doing anything wrong and that they're resolving it. That's sometimes if the adversary is targeting you. You know, more often what an insider threat program is going to do is harden that target by helping you build a level of personal resilience so that when you're going through any one of these natural life crises, natural events, you do have the power to make it through, not be targeted or approached, not move down that critical pathway to negative behavior, but really get that intervention and support that you need. And insider threat programs do provide that support. We've got that whole team, HR folks, behavioral scientists, the security folks, all working together to make sure that you can remain in access and remain a positive asset to your organization. I know sometimes people think that it's a gotcha. We want to get people out, fire them. We don't want to. You were expensive. You were expensive to recruit. You were expensive to train. You're expensive to retain. Believe me, we want to keep you, and we want to keep you safe. Again, you're a target, and it happens all the time. You know, these are just a couple of cases just from the last couple of years, manifesting in lots of different ways. So whether they're national security crimes, economic espionage, or trade secret theft, whether they are acts of violence, acts of harm to the self or others, repeatedly, those same kind of indicators are coming up. All right, I do want to give one little caveat here. I'd like to draw, if I could, a very bright line between a legitimate whistleblower and an insider threat. Insider threat programs, and indeed I think most of us who work in CI and security have a big respect for the whistleblower program. It serves a very valuable purpose. It puts a good check and balance on governmental activities. And there are very specific protocols and points of contact that you would go through in order to engage in whistleblowing. If you're not familiar with it, there's so much information out there on the No Fear Act, Office of Special Counsel. You can go through your IG program. We also have at CDSE, we have a toolkit on unauthorized disclosure that has a whole section on appropriate measures to take if you would like to become a whistleblower or explore those options. This is very different, however, from disclosing classified information to somebody outside of a need to know and then later calling it whistleblowing. It's not the same thing. You have to follow appropriate protocols. What's on the line when you disclose classified information, whether you think it's innocuous or not? You didn't make that original classification determination. You don't know what kind of sources and methods you're putting at risk. You don't know what kind of warfighter operations you're putting at risk, that information cannot go out. If something needs to be done to curb governmental activity, it will be done, and they take you seriously. They've always taken you seriously, but believe me, after Snowden, after Manning, after Winter, they will take you seriously. If you're not familiar, you don't know where to go, you've looked at the resources and don't understand them, reach out to your Insider Threat Program. They will steer you on the right path to get where you need to go. Whistleblowers are not considered insider threats. I'd also say, for those of you who are maybe thinking of writing an article, appearing on a talk show, finally going to get that screenplay done, there is a process called pre-publication review, and this can be used to evaluate your materials before you get them out there so that we can make sure there are no inadvertent, unauthorized disclosures. Again, we have resources on our website that can get you there, but if you have questions, reach out to your Insider Threat Program. That Insider Threat Program is a resource for you. This is a group of individuals who come together to really identify vulnerabilities, identify potential threats, and mitigate risk. They're not in the risk elimination business, okay? No matter how good your Insider Threat Program is, no matter how hard they work, and no matter how often you report, you're never going to eliminate the possibility of an insider threat. But you can manage that possibility, and you can manage that risk if you have appropriate access to the information and the indicators. Now, we're really lucky today that we're going to get a presentation about Insider Threat Program risk mitigation in action from the Army, so I don't want to steal any of their thunder. But before we bring them up, there are a few things that I'd like to share with you as far as resources that are out there. So if you want to learn more about the insider threat and you're not familiar with cdsc.edu, I encourage you to come over and check out our website. Go to cdsc.edu and navigate over to Insider Threat. We have a wealth of resources that can be used in your organization to get the word out. Case studies on some of the cases that we briefly flashed up there today. We have videos, we have e-learning. We also have what we call toolkits. And one of these is on vigilance and awareness campaign materials. So we are in the middle of Insider Threat Awareness Month, but insider threat awareness is all year long, and we have plenty of ways for you to engage. If you've never played one of our fun games, we have a trivia twirl, we have concentration, we have crosswords, we have word searches. Please log on and download some of these. We also have posters which are customizable, award-winning video campaigns, a whole wealth of resources that are really out there for you guys. Also, for those of you that are insider threat practitioners, we have a host of e-learning on topics such as privacy and civil liberties in an insider threat program. That's something that we take very seriously. We work very closely with many government organizations in order to develop that training to ensure that the insider threat programs that serve you are respecting the privacy and the civil liberties of the workforce. We also have training on hub operations, critical thinking for insider threat analysts, mitigation response options, cyber insider threat. We have two coming out, the cyber insider threat as well as behavioral science and insider threat programs this fall, so please look for those. I'd also like to point out that we have a number of resources on kinetic violence and kinetic violence response. So again, as Mr. Belk pointed out, this behavior has become so commonplace that we're almost inured to it. It's become normalized. Let's not get there. Let's not get there. Even one incident is too many. If you don't know how to identify the indicators that somebody might commit harm to themselves or others, reach out to the website. If you're not sure what to do to respond during an incident, reach out to the website. There's lots of resources culled from throughout the community, great stuff from FBI, Homeland Security, DOD, and others. So I encourage you to access that.